Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm going to wake you up with my talk. Let's see. I bring with me two case studies on the governance of risks, one from Chile and one from Germany. Both are related to the forest sector and the timber industry. And I would like to show you how governance and knowledge within governance can work, and how different modes of governance, market modes, hierarchical modes, or network modes of governance may influence how knowledge is circulating in governance. I'm going to structure my talk to tell you that I see governance as a black box, and I'm very curious to analyze it. So I apply an analytical perspective on understanding governance. And in this case of my talk, and in the forest industry, the governance relates to several things. I'm very much interested in the economic side of governance. That means to reduce transaction costs in the markets, to connect forest owners, especially small ones, with sawmills and other markets. And there were several stakeholders organized governance. And there it is included the state very much often, because at the same time the forest sector is related to regional development ideas or strategies. Forests provide a lot of ecological functions, and there are natural reserves, and therefore often the state is involved in the governance of the forest sector. But I'm very much interested in understanding economic risks of this sector, and that's why I call it risk governance, what I'm analyzing, and especially natural risks that are combined with human risks, but I will come to that later. When we open the first black box of governance, we can detect several modes of governance or forms of governance, and network governance works quite well in that sector, it seems, as it involves different stakeholders that can cooperate but stay autonomous at the same time. But sometimes we see that huge companies or the state takes control of that governance process, so we can call it hierarchies. But at the same time, we see that markets are present, and is it possible to combine that and to take a look at the production of knowledge in each of these governance modes, even if they are not directly at place? So the next question will be, do they produce knowledge on risks, on these natural risks and economic risks, and how does this risk governance work in the moment of, for example, a very heavy risk event, of a natural catastrophe, if you like to say? So how is knowledge applied, produced, and circulated within governance? And I bring with me two case studies. One is connected to network mode of governance. The other one is more related to markets. In both cases, we will see that hierarchies are influencing the governance organization. And the risk we are very interested in the case of Germany, we will take a look at the Sauerland region. There are bark beetles that are putting in danger the industry, and at the same time we have heavy windstorms that can affect the industry as well and influence price fluctuation in the market very heavily. On the other side, in the case of Chile, we have the forest fires as the most dominant risk. And what I'm going to show you is, and I try to open the other one, black boxes of risk governance, and what I'm going to show you is how different modes of governance are connected with different kind of knowledge production. And is this knowledge production sufficient to control or to manage that risk, especially in the moment of a heavy catastrophe? What I'm going to show you is, in both cases, that we can talk about noise reduction as one of the main interests that stakeholders may have in a governance process, and in interdependencies they are faced with, or maybe they value these interdependencies as valuable. What I'm going to show you also is that in both cases, I interpret the governance of risk as a failure. It didn't work in the two case studies we applied. And we saw that this risk governance even enhanced or augmented the risk that they were facing at the end. I can show you that with empirical data. And so our question remains, how is it possible to avoid this kind of failure? And maybe we have to switch or to change some of the governance modes. My speech is structured in the following way. I'm giving you a short theoretical introduction on what we understand as governance and why we are keen to use it as an analytical concept. And then I'm going to introduce you very briefly the two case study regions, and afterwards going deeper into that case studies to explain you where and how do we understand the types of risk present there. And I'm giving a short conclusion and open up new research questions. This is a work in progress. We are advancing it since for 3 years now, but last year we managed to touch a very new, interesting topic. We entered the insurance industry in Chile, and so the work is going on in that direction, and I'll give you an idea of what do we expect further. So governance for us is an analytical concept, and if you like to use some very influential work from Renate Mainz, for example, or Bob Yesop, both of them are very inspiring for us, and they give us the idea that you can get access to governance, as we already learned in other presentations the days before, that you can apply a problem perspective. There are problems at play, and therefore we are going to look for new governance. But also different actors are involved, so you can start analyzing governance from an actor's perspective as well. You can understand what kind of knowledge do they bring to the table. Then there's an institutional perspective, as governance is a process evolving, but at the same time creating structures, or, as we will see, routines to communicate knowledge, for example. And you can apply a spatial and a time perspective, as governance is an evolving process. Governance often refers to different modes of coordinating action, in that case amongst economic actors. And so we can apply the idea of Williamson that we can differentiate between markets, hierarchies, and networks as 3 different modes of governance. What is interesting for us, and Yesop does stress that, is that governance identifies different power interdependencies, and he says it's very worth for us as academics to analyze that kind of interdependencies, because in our interpretation, based on Yesop, they play a crucial role in if governance is going to work or not. And we will see that in the risk governance I will show you. And we can conclude that governance organizes communication, and that this communication is guided towards reducing noise within governance, so that the actors that come from different tables to meet in one specific table are able to understand each other. And that's all about knowledge and about bridging cognitive distances and applying heterogeneous knowledge. So what can we expect from theory when we ask ourselves, how does different knowledge and the governance modes enhance or help to manage, produce, circulate knowledge? There is a market perspective. One of the main authors, very old ones, are Hayek or Fama. They are very keen to say markets are the solution for everything. We just have to take a look at the price that is building in the market. And these prices in the market, especially price changes, communicate knowledge from decentralized market actors. These actors, we can find them here, have their own local knowledge, for example, and they take decisions on that knowledge on the market, and their decisions accumulate there and build a price. And the price communicated back to them and to other actors are, in another step, another basis for decision making, and are applied and combined with local knowledge of the actors as well. So it's a centralized system, but it's decentralized at the same time, and it's very efficient, like Hayek says, because we don't have to invest a lot in taking a look at price and compare prices and draw our own conclusion. So price changes are a very strong signal, and in that kind of theory, signals knowledge from decentralized actors. We all know that it makes a difference if we suspect or expect knowledge behind a market price, or if we actually know why the market price is changing. Do we consider all the different decisions made in different spaces? Okay, that influences the price, but do we know really what was the real basis, maybe of local knowledge behind that prices? That is what the price doesn't signal. So the theory, of course, applied is a very critical scene. So we can talk about irrational exuberance. That means that several actors try to follow other actors they consider as more important in knowledge production, and they copy what they do, and so we can come to problems of pricing bubbles or something like that. We know as well that in markets there prevail asymmetries of information between the actors, and that this information can be abused by powerful actors, and that the price comes along with buzz, with something that is noisy, but something that we cannot very easily distinguish, so we cannot analyze what kind of buzz is that. I'm going to work a lot with an idea of sounds and noises and buzz to have another words to explain what we can understand of knowledge. I will come to that later. So if we take a look at how networks influence the production and the circulation of knowledge, we can, based on economic geographers like Mastel and Meilenberg, that say that if we have proximity between us, if we are in the same network or even at the same place, we can interact more efficiently because we can see each other, we can interpret how our faces look. If I ask you, really, do you want to do that? And you say, yes, of course. Or maybe you will show nervous. So I can interpret that. And the detail of information that is accessible in direct communication within networks is enhanced. At the same time, the network actors are connected between each other. They do not depend on a central stage like market or a central actor. It can be, but there are several channels of information or communication at place at the same time. So in networks, it is said that it is able to bridge cognitive distance, because if I do not understand you, I can ask, why do I not understand you? Maybe you can explain me once more so that I can grip what you maybe want to say me. So the knowledge that is circulating in networks, it is said, has the possibility to be homogeneously understood by the different actors. I forgot to say that in markets, you can presume that markets are able to codify knowledge by the price. So that at the end, the price is one information and everybody has the same information. It's a codified knowledge, if you can say. But in networks, cognitive distance is bridged. Of course, networks come with some problems as well. We have the problem of free riding. Someone can be part of a network but doesn't invest in the production or maybe circulation of knowledge. Maybe he accesses knowledge but he doesn't share his own thoughts, so he is not participating in the development of a common language within the network. And maybe some of the actors within the network becomes very powerful, and maybe he has a very strong voice, and at the end a lot of network participants follow only him. So that are kind of dangers that we can find discussed in the literature on networks and how knowledge is circulating. And if you take a closer look at what hierarchies can offer, we can relate on risk governance experts like Ampero. He differentiates between different kind of organizational structures within companies that try to capture and understand what risks are and how to manage them. And he comes to the conclusion that hierarchies are very favorable in some situations because you can give top-down orders, and maybe the knowledge that these orders transmit are rapidly applied within decentralized departments of a company. If we want to resume what hierarchies can offer is they can structure and guide sounds within a company, for example, or within a governance process, and they can provide us with ideas of how to react immediately. Of course, missing flexibility often is something that is criticized, and often the response to changing environmental situations is not what a hierarchy can manage very easily. But the advantage as well, that's what I wanted to mention as well in hierarchies, is that there can be constructed or designed routines that prove to be very valuable. And the advantage of routine is that it carries knowledge. Within the routine and the guideline how to use the routine, knowledge is transmitted. And if someone new enters a hierarchy and he is applying that kind of routines, he is easily be able to participate with all the others within the hierarchy. So routines structured by top-down, maybe organization, give an advantage in the communication of knowledge. So let's introduce the two case studies that it becomes clear why I consider them as very interesting and why we have to analyze knowledge fluctuations there, because they are very much related to the risks I want to discuss. The first one is the Sauerland region in the center or northern center of Germany in the region of northern Westphalia. And at the other side, we can compare that region because of our empirical interest in sawmills and forest owners and state that is participating in governance of forest and timber markets. We can compare it with the Chalca province in Chile, one of the first important forest regions in Chile, for example. The regions are comparable because we find a lot of sawmills, for example, small ones, medium-sized ones, and bigger ones. You can see it on the map here. With that circle, we try to capture big sawmills that are quite dominant in the region, have the necessity to get access to primary resources of timber. And we have the same kind of big actors in the Chalca region. So at the same time, in the region, there are also co-located very small sawmills, and they all compete to get the access to the primary resources. That's why they are interested in something like market governance, but in that moment, it is not so much related to risk in a general sense, but more to reduce transaction costs. If you imagine that in Germany, and I will show you that in the next slide, we have a very diverse structure of forest owners. We have the state and the communities, the mayors of that region that are owners of forests, but we see a lot of private forest owners, and most of them are very small ones that only possess 2 or 3 hectares. And how can you access that kind of timber they can offer in several years? And so you need some structure that reduces transaction costs because they're actually very high. If you compare the forest ownership in Chile, and that's one important thing that maybe influences a lot how governance is organized. In Chile, the state is not very present. It's absent as a forest owner, but we have huge companies, and actually we have one huge company called Arauco in that region that owns, I have to take a look at it, 56% of all forests in that region. While if you take a look at Germany, sawmills usually are not owners of forests in Germany. So they depend on a value chain of forest sector, while in the Chilean case, this huge company is organizing a value chain by its own. So there are kind of 2 differences I would like to mention. And we have to add that in Germany, the state is involved a lot in how to manage and how to organize that market because it is involved in organizing the whole market as it mobilizes the primary material in the smaller forests that are owned by small forest owners, because they do not, I have to tell you, in Germany the forests are owned since, I have no idea, more than 500 years. Ownership is very traditional there, and most owners do not live nearby their forests. So they live in Berlin, for example, but have property in Sauerland. So they need someone who is actually managing that kind of property. Sometimes they do not even know that they are owners, and that will lead to a risk that I come later on, because if they do not manage the forest, maybe some risks are accumulating within the forest and they are not aware of that. So the state in Germany is involved in managing especially the smaller kind of properties of forests. But the state in Germany has another function. It collects the raw material and then it negotiates with the sawmills. And of course, it negotiates one price and it sells it mostly for that price. So the contact between the forest owners and the sawmills are not direct. It's a detail we need to know for the further understanding of governance of risk later on. In the Chilean case, the big company, as a big owner of forests, is organizing the market. It opens up access to that resources he owns to the smaller ones of the sawmills in the region. But as we can imagine, if he changes his strategy and maybe doesn't want to give them his access to his primary resources, he can dominate the market quite a while, quite heavily. At the moment, they avoid that because the huge company, as was shown by the other slide or the other map, is mostly dedicated to international markets, while the smaller sawmill ones work for the national market. So they do not compete directly, but they compete because of the primary resources. The state doesn't play a huge role in Chile in the governance of the forest sector. How does it play out if we take a look at the risk And in the two regions, there are risks present each year. These data only want to give you a short overview that the bark beetle comes every year to Germany. It is manageable. If you detect him right from the beginning, you can handle it and you can reduce the risk, economic risks he can provide or provoke. But there are recurring thunderstorms striking to Germany. We have a list of several of the bigger ones the last years. And in average, here it's calculated an average of 15 years, they also destroy a lot of value within the woods. I calculated it and I come to the conclusion that the annual loss of the annual damage that in the average these thunderstorms produce are 15.8 million euros. That's a lot. Okay, the forest industry is used to that and they do not calculate the whole benefits when they produce raw material, but the data are especially high if you consider that in 2007, and that will be my case study, the thunderstorm called Kirill Chuck, or attacked, you can say, the Sauerland, especially the Sauerland, and it destroys up to 30,000 hectares of forest. That's immense, and that's why the annual loss is very high. They expect that a similar thunderstorm is going to hit the region the years that come, but unfortunately it didn't happen yet. There's a very huge connection between bark beetle and thunderstorm, because if a thunderstorm is present and the forests are destroyed, the bark beetle enters easier to the trees and can damage them even more. In Chile, forest fires are very much present. They are present every year, and on average they produce a lot of damage. Do you have the numbers here? Not yet, but they destroy on average, each event on average destroys 11 hectares, and in the region I'm going to take a look at, in the last years more than 100, even 150 fire events are in place. What's interesting is that the cause of that forest fires, it's not only natural, no, it's nearly not natural. The causes of that forest fires are accidents, or they come out from the agricultural industry, but 11% of all the events that we can identify are related to incendiarism. They are provoked intentionally. So that's interesting if we later on take a look at the insurance sector. With that slide, I would like to introduce complexity in the topic of risk. Risks are real because they are observable and they affect you. Maybe they cause damage on life. But at the same time, they are socially constructed, because when we talk about risk, we produce them. And if we talk about forest fires that could happen, we produce sensitiveness to that kind of risks. And that influences, of course, how risk governance is organized. But if you compare the two risks, and I do not want to go deep to that, but we can find a quite huge complexity. There are environmental or factors influencing, for example, bark beetle or winds, and the climate change is one that is mentioned a lot, even if they do not have the possibility to calculate exactly how climate change is influencing, for example, the increase of risk in the regions. But we have also different species that maybe are affected heavier than others by bark beetle or by wind. And we have small and medium-sized forest owners that are not present in their own forests, so bark beetle maybe can multiply there and transmit the risk to other forests nearby. If you take a look at the case of Chile, forest fires are even more difficult to understand. In Chile, I have to say, we have environmental aspects as well, but we have also very heavy social aspects that influence how forest fires are present in Chile. And I mentioned the incendiarism. In Chile, there's a lot of critique on how the huge companies in that sector form an oligopoly or a monopoly. And so social riots, social revolts are present to express their their critique on that kind of market dominance by several actors. And incendiarism maybe is one of the manifestations of their protest. So it's quite difficult for actors to calculate when, how, and exactly in what kind of magnitude these incendiarisms are present in what kind of year and how they influence the risk or how it is grown. Of course, exotic species that are introduced especially by huge companies influence as well how forest fires can spread within the region. Forest fires are quite geographical risks. Okay, how can we analyze and understand the knowledge and the management of crisis events like forest fires or winter storms in Germany? Let's start with the Sauerland. Kyrill hit Germany in the 7th of January 2007 with heavy wind speeds, and it destroyed, as I mentioned, 30,000 hectares of forests. The loss of value of the raw material maybe sounds not so much, but at the end, the total loss of this event was 200 million euros. That was a lot. And it could not be calculated right from the beginning. So in the moment of the event, and I remember talking to forest owners that they called me that they had tears in their eyes entering their forest the next day after the storm, and they couldn't see anything because they had no idea how much of their forests were destroyed and how they could manage maybe to reduce the loss in that day. So they referred to the state that is very much involved in the governance of forest markets there and demanded a solution. And they pressured the politics in that region to find a solution, because we find 10,000 of forest owners in that region. It turned out that they managed to organize heavy machinery to organize and reorder the forest, to clean it up, and to sell it to especially huge forest companies, especially sawmills and paper mills in Germany. What was left was, of course, a new landscape, and the problem of erosion was also very present. In the aftermath, it turned out that a lot of forest owners started to grow Christmas trees instead of the trees that formerly were there, though the landscape changed heavily in the Sauerland region. And from a standpoint of the state who tries to include a very sustainable kind of forestry, that's a disaster. And if you consider the possibility they maybe had in reorganizing the landscape with maybe species that are more adapted to climate change, they didn't, in the end, in the sum, manage that very well. They didn't use the window of opportunity there. But what I wanted to mention is that they destroyed the small and medium-sized sawmill industry in the same region with the decisions they took, and I have to mention a very specific one. Because what was the solution for the governance of that kind of risks in that region was to organize a very strong contract with the company Klausner that gave them nearly exclusive access to the forest resources of that region. They signed a contract for 7 years where they fixed the market prices of square meter, not square meter, isn't it? Festmeter, cubic meter, on 70 euros. You have to know that the market price before the event was 100 euros per square cubic meter, and they expected it to fall to 50. So the 70 seems to be a very plausible price, but it was fixed for 7 years, and they didn't include flexibility in the contract. They asked the other sawmills in the region to participate in that contract, but they denied it. And that's interesting because the whole governance there was based on a relationship contracts. That means they tried to establish strong relationships between forest owners, the state, and the sawmills. And if you take a look at a longer time period, this relationship could work out very well. If you consider that every 15 years a thunderstorm like that hits the region, and maybe in the event of the crisis, the sawmills maybe can pay a better price than the real market price in the event of a crisis. And if you want to expect that, maybe you have to invest in the relationship, and maybe as a forest owner accept that maybe you reduce the price in the market in the other 15 years when there's no crisis event present. But they didn't invest a lot in that kind of relationship, as it turned out, because at the end, in the event of the crisis, the sawmills, everyone, the big one as well, tried to have the opportunity to gain the market. The sawmills in the market expected the price to fall down so that they can buy cheap and sell expensive. And they didn't accept a market price of 70 that they had to pay. They wanted to get access to the spot market. If we want to understand that kind of contract between the company and the state, of course, if we consider events like Lothar in 1999 that showed us that the price will stay low after such heavy events because of the bark beetle that also strikes the region, we can understand that they calculated 70 euros as a very good contract base. But if you take a look at the company, and maybe they considered 70 as a very good price as well, because maybe they considered the price to rise again very quickly. Maybe they had market access, information about market, because they are a very good market participant. And as it turned out, that's how the market price at the end developed. So at the end, the company had access to cheap forest resources, while others in the region didn't have the same access. And so the small and medium-sized companies disappeared because of that decision. That was kind of contractual decision between the state and that kind of huge company. Okay, I have to skip a little bit because I'm nearly out of time. Let's go to another case, and I only show you the main message we got out of that. If you take a look at Chile, you can say, yes, if you calculate risk, the risk is different within time and within the regions. And if that's the case, we have to ask ourselves, does the different risks in Chile, in different region and different time, are represented by the market price of insurance products, insurance contracts against forest fire risks? That's what a hypothesis of ours was, and we entered to the industry or insurance industry to get a better understanding of that. And we found out that, yes, the market price builds on expectations from forest owners and the insurance companies about the risk. They calculate the risk. That's what we can expect. But at the same time, we understand that the negotiation between them is very intransparent. So it's not very accessible for others to understand how prices are built and what prices are actually at the market. So it depends a lot on the negotiation between the two actors. So the market doesn't signal with the price the whole knowledge of all these actors on the risk and calculating this kind of risk. We see a value chain present in the insurance sector in Chile, and as it turns out, this value chain isn't organized by markets at the moment. It's organized by commercial power of different actors, and that dominates and influences the price that is built at the end. It's not a price based on risk calculations. That's the resume that I can tell. And it has a lot to do with the market power of the huge forest companies that can negotiate very good prices in the insurance market. I have to skip that a little bit, but I want to turn to a point that can be called systemic risk. Because if you go back to the region of Talca and you understand how the cluster of forestry works there, you can find a distraction between the different stakeholders in that region. At the first end, you would say sawmills that are owners of forest and forest owners are all on the same page when it comes to the risk of forest fire, because one forest fire can start here and spread out towards other forest property. But if you take a closer look and go deep into interviews with them, they tell you that no, we are not on the same page, because sometimes a forest fire breaks out on a small property of a small forest owner, and he doesn't control it, he's not able to control it because he has no watchtowers, he has no forest fire brigades, so his fire comes and endangers our property. So we have to protect his property with our machinery. We have the machinery, so we have access to the insurance contract because the insurance companies demanded to have forest watchtowers in the region, but there's a free riding problem because the smaller ones do not participate in the governance. They use the presence of the huge company. Here you can see all its property and the machinery that he has. At the other side, so it's a critique articulated by the huge company towards the smaller ones. They are not on the same page. On the other side, if a forest fire breaks out in the forest of the huge company, the smaller ones often interpret that the brigades are directing the fire towards our property to stop it, because you cannot stop fire without cutting trees. So maybe that's the region where we have to cut the trees and to get rid of the forest fire events. So there is a critique coming out from the smaller ones as well. They do not organize a governance together. And the question will be, does this influence at the end the insurance companies? They didn't notice that because, as we found out, the insurance industry stays in Santiago de Chile, but they do not come to the region to get access to that kind of local knowledge there. The circulation of knowledge doesn't work very well. But in the end, insurance companies maybe will reduce the offer of insurance. Just to mention, a forest fire event in January of this year. Maybe you heard about it. It was the worst one in that took place in Chile. We didn't consider it in our interviews, but we are happy to come back and to see how risk calculations now take place, because this event was so heavy that insurance companies for sure have to reconsider their own models of risk calculation and risk communication. Let me come to concluding remarks. I couldn't go to the detail, but I found out that interdependencies between the actors maybe are very crucial for governance to work. And you can say that because interdependencies can be seen as a value, as an asset within governance. If we are interdependent, we can start a trust relationship because we have to work together for a long time. We are interdependent. We cannot leave the relationship very easily, but that gives us the possibility maybe to design something on the long term. And we can use that relationship maybe to get us known, to know a common language, and to talk about risks and about knowledge on risks that we maybe right from the beginning do not understand. We can produce knowledge with a long-term relationship. But maybe interdependencies are very crucial, because if we are interdependent, I do not see you as a competitor, and maybe I will share even more my knowledge or my interpretations with you and do not protect my private knowledge that I maybe can use in the market. But at the same time, these interdependencies are easily destroyed with mistrust. This was the case in the Sauerland region, where the event showed that no, what they talked about, the relationship, they didn't practice that in the event of the risk. And in the Chile region, we try to look for these interdependencies. They are omnipresent when we talk about forest fires, but we couldn't see that they were used as an asset to start maybe a productive knowledge relationship between them. So I let it for further discussion if it is possible to connect different kind of modes of governance, signals from the market, loud signals like prices, but also local buzz, only be able to analyze if you are staying in a relationship in the place, and what kind of role does hierarchy play to offer routines for the transmission of different knowledge within governance. I think that remains open, a very interesting research question based on Williamson, but developing it further towards a complex understanding of risk communication or knowledge communication on risks in governance. Thank you very much.